Hello guys, I'm very excited. We'll do another tutorial using Entity Framework Core for configuring an operational data. So far, in our application, we have a static class which actually contains the data about the clients, resources, and claims. It's going to be a very good idea to put all this data into a database. So this is what we're gonna do. And before we start, I just remember this morning watching Hasselman, one of the .NET associates, I don't know, maybe it's working for Microsoft, explaining what is .NET. .NET is a platform, as they say. It's environment for building things. What things? Can I build a helicopter with .NET? Obviously no, but it's too broad and people get confused. So in the nutshell, actually, .NET is a couple of languages, not couple, but some languages. One of them is C#, F#, Visual Basic, runtime, common language runtime, which runs all of these languages, which are first compiled to common intermediate language. And the third component is the library. And even in a smaller nutshell, I would say that .NET for me and for my students is C# plus libraries. That's it. The runtime, you don't see it actually. So you don't communicate with it that much. Closing this bracket, I will continue now with using Entity Framework Core for configuring and operational data. In the previous quick start, we created our client and scope data in code. On startup, IdentityServer loaded this configuration data into memory. Let me just make sure that I'm recording right now. Yeah, in memory. Not quite sure if this changes something. Actually, probably this should change something. Okay, so hopefully this is gonna make our sound better. We'll see. I'll check. So I'm still using the microphone of the laptop, but I'm maybe 1.5 meters away from the microphone and a little bit aside. So maybe that's why the microphone cannot pick up the best sound. It gets mostly environment sounds, ambient noises, whatever. So, but so far so good. Let's continue with that. Hopefully you understand my English. If we wanted to modify this configuration data, we had to stop and start IdentityServer. IdentityServer also generates temporary data such as authorization codes, consent choices, and refresh tokens. By default, these are also stored in memory. We don't want that. We wanted this into the database. Having all this data into the database will allow us to share this data between many instances of IdentityServer and something else. We can build actually a backend. We can build controllers and views, which will allow our clients, the developers which create clients, to go register their clients and all this kind of stuff. So administrative panel, by the way, they have such template, but it's paid. To move this data into a database that's persistent between restart and across multiple identity servers instances, we can use the IdentityServer Entity Framework library. So the guys from IdentityServer4 actually has created already one library, NuGet package, as you can guess. In addition to manually configure Entity Framework support, there is also an IdentityServer template to create a new project with Entity Framework support using .NET. In other words, if we don't start with a project which is already existing, but you start from scratch, you can use this template, which will include everything what is necessary to communicate with the database. If you're starting fresh, use this command, .NET IdentityServer4 Entity Framework. IdentityServer4 Entity Framework. IdentityServer4 Entity Framework implements the required stores and services using the following DB contexts. Configuration DB context, used for configuration data such as client, resources, and scopes. Persisted grant DB context, used for temporary operational data such as authorization codes and refresh tokens. These contexts are suitable for any Entity Framework Core compatible relational database. You can find these contexts. So we will have two contexts actually. One of them is the store and another one is persistent grant context, DB context. Configuration DB context, that's for configuration file which we had. Instead of just talking, let me open PowerShell. Let's go to D, change directory project, change directory trash, change directory quick start, ls, put, and let me show you what I'm talking about. Right now, our identity server for configuration is using the configuration file config. Here we go. This is what we use so far for our clients, to define our clients, to define the API scopes and identity resources. And we don't want that. We want all the clients to be into the database, the scopes, whatever. Okay, let me close this, close this. As you can see, I'm switching back and forth between Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio Prime. This is exactly what I'm gonna do today as well. So we will have two different contexts. And as we know, the context is, in terms of Entity Framework, is something which allows us to communicate with the database. So .NET Add Package IdentityServer4 Entity Framework. This is what we have to do right now. Of course, we have to go to the project, which is, Identity Server. Let me make sure I'm here. I'm even gonna open right now JavaScript. I don't need that. Identity Server. We know that everything necessary is in IdentityServer prosh. So we'll see how actually this file is going to be changed. And by the way, since in this tutorial we are going to using local DB, probably I'm going to use Visual Studio Prime, but whatever. Let me install first this package from the console. I can do this from Visual Studio Prime as well. I prefer console because I can copy and paste the comments, so I will have in sequential order all the comments I have executed in a simple notepad file. But Add Package IdentityServer4 and Microsoft Prime, actually Visual Studio Prime, is a perfect candidate for such tutorials because everything is visual there. Anyway, so .NET Add Package IdentityServer Entity Framework. Let me add this one. There is something specific which we will stumble upon right now. So .NET Add Package IdentityServer Entity Framework determines project to restore, writing C blah blah blah, temporary adding package, lock, fail to restore the project blah blah. Waiting access files, everything seems to me fine. So far so good. Some projects have trouble loading. Please review the output for more details. Show output. Look at this now. IdentityServer4, Identity Framework 404, IdentityServer4, IdentityServer 404. Downgrade IdentityServer4 from 404 to 400. Okay, you have options to downgrade. Because right now, IdentityServer, we just installed IdentityServer Framework 404. I guess recently these guys actually have released the new versions of IdentityServer an IdentityServer entity framework. An IdentityServer framework, which we just installed, has a dependency on IdentityServer but version 404. Error, detected package downgrade. IdentityServer 4 from 404 to 4000 reference the package directly from the project to select a different version. What I'm gonna do actually, I'm gonna upgrade my IdentityServer in this project. And just for fun, and to show how easy it is, actually, what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna install this from Visual Studio Prime. So let me find the project in File Explorer. We can do it both ways. We can do it from the CLI, we can do it from Quick Start, and I'm gonna start here my IdentityServer. Not start, but open my IdentityServer project. So we can do it from the command line interface, and we can do it from Visual Studio Prime. And I will do it from Visual Studio Prime. Since I can do it very easy, why should I bother doing it from the command line interface? So I'm gonna switch back and forth, as I said. Config, IdentityServer config, okay. I'm in the config of the IdentityServer, but this is not what I'm looking for. Right now the project maybe is ready. I'm gonna close this. Yeah, what I forgot is actually to add all the files when we finish with the tutorial to the source control management system to Git. But anyway, I'm gonna do it when I resolve this issue right now, which we have. So let me go and manage NuGet package NuGet packages. Look at this. IdentityServer now has an update, and it's a good thing that it happened this way, because we installed IdentityServer. We started our journey here a few days ago, maybe a week ago, and since then a new package has been released, version 404. Here we go. Version 4 is what I have installed. And IdentityServer entity framework actually is using latest stable 404. I don't know why did I install 400. In any case, the dependency is of IdentityServer framework depends on IdentityServer frame in IdentityServer 4 404, version 404. So let me upgrade. Okay, I'm upgrading the package. Now the problem solved, and I see that there is another package which actually has an upgrade 3.4. So why don't we do that? Why don't we upgrade this package as well? This is the package for logs. Okay, I accept the license agreement and end user license agreement, EULA. Okay, so now if you look at the file again, probably we should see that now we have IdentityServer 4. Maybe you noticed. If not, go back and look at again the cprosh file. You'll see that we had dependency on 400. Now it's 404. We can start the IdentityServer just to make sure that it works. Actually, we can do this by pressing this button, because we have configured two projects to start. Here we go, IdentityServer start and API start. Okay, so we don't have IdentityServer package actually installed in any other applications as far as I remember. It's only in this host application. So let me try and see if it works. Right now, as I said, I'm going to switch back and forth. Now it should run on port 5001. Of course, this is the API, which is giving us 401, which is not allowed, is not found is not 404, which is not found, is you don't have permissions to access project track quickly. What is that? Press in there, blah blah, identity server, bin debug, net. Okay, so where did it go? I don't know. Press any key to close the window. Because I didn't notice what happened, I'm gonna start it again, just for any case. Weather forecast 5001, and what I can do is actually no, I cannot start it right now because I was thinking about starting my client, but if you look at the client, the ports are different, so this is another issue we have to solve. Look at this. API client generator is gonna look at for 6001. The API is running, should be running on 6001, and right now it's running on random port assigned by Internet Information Services, so we will change the configuration, the start configuration. Okay, so far so good. The project compiles and we can run it. Before I forget, let me add it to the source control system. So IdentityServer project. Only this actually has been changed, as you can see. So here I'm gonna put .NET package entity framework, adding. I'm gonna put all this as a commit message, commit all, and that's it. Now we should be all set. Let me check again. Source. Yeah, I'm gonna say git status, git log, and we will see that the last one, adding .NET package identity framework, blah blah. Okay, so we're good to go now. Using SQL Server. For this quick start, we'll use the local DB. Notice this, not SQLite, but local DB version for SQL Server that comes with Visual Studio. To add SQL Server support to our IdentityServer project, you'll need the following NuGet package. Okay, so let me do that. I'm gonna close Visual Studio because what I notice is that when I'm installing from the console the packages, Visual Studio Prime doesn't always pick up these packages, doesn't understand these packages have been added, and it requires to be shut down and launched again in order to work, to recognize these packages. So let me go to the source, let me go to IdentityServer and start it and install the package. Package Microsoft Entity Framework Core. This comes from Microsoft SQL Server in order to work with local DB. This is the second thing we have to do. Now, as you can guess, in our prosh file, we have now ls notepad IdentityServer prosh. Okay, so we have IdentityServer for Entity Framework, Authentication Google, this is for external, Entity Framework SQL Server, here we go. This is what has been added. And as Hazelman says, the NuGet packages don't get installed into the same folder. It just up to the prosh file, all these dependencies, and they keep them somewhere in the central repository, whatever, in our computer. The IdentityServer4 Entity Framework Store package contains entity classes that map from IdentityServer models. So we won't even see the entities there into this NuGet package which we just have installed. As IdentityServer's model change, so will the entity classes in IdentityServer4 Entity Framework Store. as you use IdentityServer4 entity framework storage and upgrade over time, you're responsible for your database scheme and changes necessary to that scheme as the entity classes change. So I'm responsible to synchronize the changes which I make. One approach for managing those changes is to use entity framework migrations. Okay, if we click here, we get to the migrations. Actually, I have the very same thing here open. So migrations, how the migrations are done, it is the explanation after creating your entities and your context. Actually, what you have to do, .NET entity framework migration. So you will have everything necessary to build the database into migrations folder, and after that you just update the database. That's it. This is the bottom line. Okay, so which is what we will use in this quick start. If migrations are not your preference, then you can manage the scheme changes in any way you see fit. So you can do this manually. You can change your database manually. You can find the latest SQL scripts for SQL Server in the IdentityServer4 entity framework storage repository. So even the scripts are there. Let me open this. I will put all these links on the video in the description. Okay, so to start using these stores, you will need to replace any existing calls to add in-memory clients, add in-memory identity resources, add in-memory API scopes. Where are these things? They're in startup of our project. Let me start again our Visual Studio. Maybe I should stick only with Visual Studio, but I can just shut it down because I installed another package. Now I'm gonna launch it back again. Current solutions, blah 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 blah. Okay, let me close everything what we have here. It's a good thing. Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. You see it here. And I'm gonna open IdentityServer. Yeah, we made changes, so that's why. That's why is this check here. Startup. Okay, so we have to change all this. var builder, services, add identity server, add in-memory identity resources. Look, add in-memory identity resources. This should be changed. Add in-memory API scopes. Add in-memory clients. Add test is not changing. It's adding Bob and Alice as users, and we will be careful just for the rest. So build, app development, blah 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 blah. Okay. So here you're gonna use a different code now. Instead of this add in memory, configure services method in configure services method startup CS, we have to use add configuration store and add operational store. Add operational store, add configuration store. This is what we need. var migration, assembly type of startup, blah blah, const. This const actually contains the connection string, which is necessary to connect to the database. Okay, so now let's a little bit think about what we have done. Var migrations assembly. Okay, that's fine. Service. Look at this. Service add identity server. Yeah, this is where a lot of guys actually stumble upon problems and have problems, but you have to think. You just have to think. The guys which have created the identity server have done more than enough. Now it's our job, it's our turn actually to think about what we have to do. I'll put here, it was working in memory. Okay. Now migrations assembly started get type info assembly, a little bit reflection, get type assembly, get name. This is the assembly name, const string. This is the connection string which is used to connect to the database. It's a local DB which is going to be used right now, not SQLite or something else. Var builder, because after that we use the builder for our sign in and also for the external services. Look at this. Options. If there is a problem, we'll fix it. Builder. I don't see it here for the external services, but whatever. So we'll keep the external services. If there are problems, we'll fix it. So we may need to add using statements, system reflection, use SQL Server, using Microsoft Entity Framework Core, use SQL Server. That's it. So far so good. Right now we are almost ready to use for configuration to use database instead of in-memory file, which is the config. So this config file actually has to be translated in terms of the database, should be recorded somehow. All these properties should be recorded somehow into a database, and the startup should read all this configuration instead of reading it from here. Should read it from here, from the database. So I'm gonna put here the link to this, tutorial actually. By the way, I think I have already this database, so I'm gonna drop it, and in order to use that, in order to do that, I'm gonna use SSMS server and Microsoft SSMS SQL Server Management Studio. Let me open this one, SQL Server Management Studio. I'm gonna drop this database. I'm gonna connect to the local database. I have, as you can see, other different databases. I have local DB, I have SQL Server here running on this machine, which I hate. I don't like it. It's very resource consuming. I have a remote database, so let me connect to the local database. Where are the files? I just want to show you this as well. So the files are here, local disk, oops, no, this one. Look at this, users, user. And if you scroll down, look at this. You will find all these files, which are the files of different databases. If you look at here now, you will find the correlation. Okay, this is the database which we are going to be using. And since I have used this database already, I'm going to drop it because I want this project to start from zero. Gonna delete this database if it's possible. Yes, I have deleted. As you can see, we don't have such database anymore. We can use either SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, or we can use Visual Studio to see all these databases. ASP.NET, as you can see, I have a lot of databases here on different reasons. Okay, I showed you where the databases are. So now I'm sure that we don't have such a database, and it's going to be created. It says the database is going to be called IdentityServer4 Quick Start Entity Framework 4.0.0, even though it's 4.04. Trusted connection, yes, okay. And it says localDB, okay. Now builder, I just added, as you saw already, this variable builder because this is what we need. We use this builder for our sign-in credentials and service authentication, external authentication, so we'll keep this. Of course, we can do this probably in the database. We'll see. Okay, so save that and go back to the tutorial. So we solved this issue and we added the Microsoft Entity Framework Core here. It should be somewhere here. Microsoft Entity Framework Core, as you can see, and using system reflection. We have system reflection as well. This is the sorcery actually, which I don't like very much about .NET, but this is the sorcery, as I said, and the Hasselman said, is a huge environment for building things. Some people compare it with operating system. It's so huge, it's so big that you have to make your way through this wonderful forest. Because magical forest, because we are using Entity Framework migrations in this quick start. Call migrations assembly is used to inform Entity Framework that the host project will contain the migrations code. Okay, so the host project will contain the migrations code. This is necessary since the host project is in a different assembly than the one that contains the DB context classes. Okay, so the context classes are in different assembly, and the migration is in our assembly. This explains actually why do we need this sorcery. Migrations assembly type blah 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 and builder. And this constant actually can be put in the configuration file and can be read it from there. But right now, let's keep it in this file, in the starter. Okay. Adding migrations. Once the identity server has been configured to use Entity Framework, we'll need to generate some migrations. Yeah, now we will get the folder migrations. And this is done again from the command line. To create migrations, you'll need to install the Entity Framework Core command line interface on your machine and the Microsoft Entity Framework Design NuGet package in IdentityServer. So in order to create migrations, now a part of the Entity Framework, which you will need definitely in your project, you'll need to install the tools for the .NET Entity Framework, which I already have installed, but for many other projects. But since it's a global, it doesn't matter the folder where you started, the present working directory. .NET tool install -- global .NET Entity Framework is going to tell me that I already have it installed. Here we go. It's not very well seen. Red over blue, mamma mia. But it says tools .NET Entity Framework is already installed. Okay. It's a global installation, but this should be installed into our project Identity Framework Design, which is going to allow us actually to create the migrations. Okay, so I'm in the proper folder. Source, did I copy this? Yes, I did. So add package Microsoft Entity Framework Design, and you already guessed that all this gets recorded into the C# proj file. Okay, let's take a look again. Where is the proj file? If you click here, you get the proj file. SQL Server, so we're gonna work with LocalDB and Framework Design. Here we go. Microsoft Entity Framework Design version blah blah. Includes runtime, build, native, all these spells and sorcery. Right now, let's forget about them. To create the migrations, open a command prompt in the IdentityServer project directory and run the following two commands. Okay, now you're gonna create the migrations. And from the migrations, actually, we can create a database. We just have to say update database, initialize the database after that. .NET, blah, blah. Okay, so gonna do it again from here. And we can look at actually how these folders will show up. You can tell by looking the comments. We always have to do this thinking process. .NET Entity Framework. So we say migrations, do migrations at initial IdentityServer persisted grant DB migration -c, which is the context, persisted grant DB context -o, and this is the output, where the migration folder should be created. In folder data, which is relative to where we are. We're in the identity server folder right now. So it's going to be created a new data folder inside migrations folder, inside of which is going to be created identity server folder and persisted grunt DB. Okay, so this migration for this context is going to be created into this folder. So let me try and see what happens. Now the project will be build started. If it's successfully built, the migration will be created. The folder data will be created, and we should be able to see it. Here we go. Done. To undo this action, use anti-framework migrations remove. Okay, we have to remember this. Identity, persistent, and voila, here we go, we have the migrations. This is the code which has been written by code generators, which will create the database. Let's create the second. Excuse me. Let's create the migrations for the second context. Do the same .NET anti-framework migrations up initial identity server configuration DB migration. This is actually the configuration things which are going to be created, tables, whatever, -C, which is configuration DB context. Use this DB context, which explains which classes are treated as entities, and for them are going to be created tables. -O, the output is going to be in data, migrations, identity server, configuration DB. Okay, so it's going to show up here somewhere. Okay, let me hit enter and see what happens now. We'll see one extra folder here in identity server. Again, built, succeeded, done, and here we go, configuration DB and persistent DB. We already read that we need two different contexts, tables from two different things, two different concerns. One concern is the configuration, which we already done here in the config file. Another one is the temporary tokens, whatever. It's necessary for the identity server to work. So you should now see a data migrations identity server folder in your project containing the code for your newly created migrations. Great. Now, so we are ready now to build a database. Initializing the database. This is very important. Now we have to read our config file, which we have, and if there are no configuration into the database doesn't even exist yet, but when it's created, we want everything what we have created in the configuration file to be transferred into the database. So we don't have to put anything else into the tables. Otherwise, we manually have to go and put these values which we had in this configuration file. We have to put all these values into the suitable tables, which we don't even know how they look. Okay, so let me do that. Now that we have the migrations, we can write code to create a database from the migrations. Okay, that's fine, but the database will be absolutely empty. The tables will be empty. We can also seed the database with the in-memory configuration data that we already defined in the previous quick start. This is what we are going to do. The approach used in this quick start is used to make it easy to get identity server up and running. And as I said, there are little challenges here. If you just copy and paste, it's not going to work. You should devise, you always have to think. We have to be thankful for having IdentityServer4. And we shouldn't be blaming the guys for the little mistakes in the documentation. Actually, if somebody wants, he can contribute, and this is going to be a very good compliment to the guys created this beautiful source, this beautiful project. you should devise. I'm very excited about IdentityServer4 because right now I can have my own STS server, security token server. And even though the administrator part is paid, so we have to pay it if we want to use it and allow developers to register their clients, we can build a community project and do the very same thing, or we can do it ourselves, or we can even pay the guys to show them respect. You should devise your own database creation and maintenance strategy that is appropriate for your architecture. Okay, that's fine. In startup CS, add this method to help initialize the database. Now, okay, it's a separate method which is private, as we can see here. I have a hard time copying all this. Don't they have something which says copy? They don't. Okay, so it doesn't matter. I'll go to the startup now, my identity server. Go at the end, because my font is a little bit bigger. I have a hard time figuring out where actually one method finishes and when another one started, where another one starts. So private initialize database application builder application using var service scope app application service get service factory create scope. Okay, that's fine. Service scope service provider get required service persisted grant DB context. Okay, so probably we will need using IdentityServer DB context. Okay, that's fine now. Data migrate var context services service scope service provider get required service configuration DB context DB context persistent grant context and configuration context data. If context clients any, this is link you. We have to add using IdentityServer4 identity framework mappers. This is link you using system link you. All this necessary namespaces has been added. To use this method any, you need to add this namespace link you DB context, whatever. We'll read what has been added. Anyway, we saw it and we can go back in the video and look at it again. So far so good. What we check here is we say, okay, now the context actually is the configuration context. Only the variable context. In context, we keep the configuration context. We say, okay, if the configuration is empty, the tables which are responsible for the configuration are empty, especially clients, this table is empty. If it's empty, for each var client config clients, we go here and we check, we read clients, all the clients. Look at here. We read all the clients. So this client, which is our console application, will be added to the database. New client, which is our MVC application, and JavaScript client is going to be added to the suitable tables, and the information will be added to the suitable fields. Context client add client to entity. Okay, context save changes, and this is going to be saved to the appropriate tables. Now, identity resources any. Okay, so this is the table clients actually. This is the table identity resources. So where are the identity resources? Here we go, identity resources. Okay, for each, and all this information from here, from identity resources, new identity resource OpenID profile will be added to the table identity resources. And now API resources, they have a table which is called API resources, and they're looking here for something which is called API resources. We can do here two things to solve this issue, and they say config APIs. Okay, read config APIs. Yes, but we don't have config APIs here. So what we can do actually is we can add this just for fun. I'm gonna comment out, but if you wanna do that, if you wanna avoid this error, we have to think a little bit further. We will have here APIs, and look, it's a guesswork right now. Context API resources, add resource, config APIs. API resources. It shouldn't be identity resource, it should be API resource. This is how I guess, this is how you should get used to work. List identity resource, API resource. Okay, and now obviously you should be putting here API resource, and voila, API resource. Now nothing's gonna complain, but we don't actually need this API resources. What we actually need are the scopes. This is what we need, API scope. So let's do a little bit reverse engineering. I showed you how I did it. Control-C. In the config, I'm gonna comment out this identity resource. I'm gonna comment out this. I don't need it. Now we have to figure out how to add API scopes. We have to do the very same thing. I'm gonna copy this. This is a little mistake into the documentation, or at least this is what I think. Okay, so it's not gonna be API resources, it's gonna be, how should it be called? API scopes. API scopes, API scope. API scopes, any. Okay, so we guess that there is a table for API scopes into IdentityServer4 project. And now in the config, this is what we have here, API scopes. We don't have APIs, we have API scopes. And now this shouldn't be called resource actually, it should be called scope. This is the proper name we should use, scope. Scope, API scope, to entity var new API scope, scope to entity. This is not, of course, API scopes. Now here we go, API scopes. So what I guess here is that for API scopes we have a table. That means that in the context then I should have a property which is called API scopes. This comes from entity framework, and if I have such thing, then I say context API scopes, add a new scope which you read from config API scopes, and this configuration is described here in this static file, in this static class which is in this file. Okay, so far so good. We did our guesswork. and hopefully this is going to work now. The above code may require you to add the following namespaces to your file. System link queue, just for fun, let's compare. System link queue, entity framework DB contexts, identity DB contexts, here we go, and entity mappers, here we go, mappers. All this has been added. At 10 and 10, we can invoke this from configure method. If you remember, before we did this in program, actually we were seeding our databases by adding code in program.cs in the main method. But here, as you can see, in the middleware, we also can add in the request pipeline, we also can seed the code. So here we go. We can see that. Let me look at here. This will do the initial DB population. The rest of the code. Okay, this is how I'm gonna start. First, create a database, seed it, and after that, do the rest. You might app use development exception page. Maybe I can go after this. No, let me put it here. As I said before, we saw that seeding actually happens much early in the pipeline. Okay, so that's it. Now, static files. The first thing we do is we create a database, we seed it with data. If it's empty, if it's not empty, it's gonna stay there. This is done by calling the initialize database, and after that we will have everything into the database, the configuration into the database. Now, if you run the IdentityServer project, the database should be created and seeded with the quick start configuration data. You should be able to use SQL Server Management Studio or Visual Studio to connect and inspect the data. We will do probably both, just for fun. And after that, we will run all our projects and make sure that all they work. Okay. Ooh, what happened? I pressed several times save. Okay, so let's keep our fingers crossed and let's start. Even if we start from here, both applications are API and IdentityServer will be start, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so build started project. Let's hope that everything is correct. And now we'll go to the SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, and make sure that everything works. Starting host, as you can see, still starting. It's creating the database now. It's seeding the database, reading the configuration file, and voila, has been started. Yes. Okay, let's start SSMS, Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and connect to the local DB. Go to the databases, IdentityServer quick start. Here we go. Tables, and as you can guess, we have clients here. Let's take a look at the clients. How many clients did we have? 3 clients. Console application, MVC application, and JavaScript application, and voila, we have the values there. What else do we have? Scopes, API scopes. Here we go. Select. Yeah, we have only one scope. API, because we are protecting only one API. That's it. And what else do we have here? Let me look at the startup. So we had, I can even look at here in the config file. So identity resources, but looking the startup file initialize, we can tell what tables have been populated with data context. So migrate clients. Let me look at the clients. Here we go, the clients, we saw already them, I guess. Yes, we did, probably, yeah, the clients. Scopes, we saw the scopes. Here we go, clients. Identity resources. Okay, let me take a look at identity resources. Identity resources, here we go. 1000. We have 2 identity resources, profile and OpenID. And we already saw the clients and the scopes, API scopes. So 3 tables. How many do I have here? I guess, why do I have 2? Yeah, because it has been hidden. Okay, so we have here Quick Start Identity Framework DBO API scopes, translated from our static class directly to the database. We have here the identity resources, and we have the clients. So far, so good. So in other words, if we want to add another client, we come here, we add another role, and we will have a client. If we need API scopes, we add just a role here like the previous ones. So the biggest challenge right now is to run all our applications and make sure that everything works. Right now, IdentityServer has been changed, so it reads its configuration data from the database, from localDB. Okay, that's great. That's just wonderful. Okay, so now, if we start the applications from Visual Studio, we'll have problems because Visual Studio actually launches the applications using IIS, Internet Information Services. And Internet Information Services has been configured to open the applications in different ports, not in 6001, 5001, 5002, whatever. So sorry about that. Before we do that, I can run the application from the console because it's going to be used Kestrel. Let's do that, and after that we'll make the corrections. This is extra step which is not necessary by the tutorial. Now if you run the IdentityServer project, the database should be created and seeded with the quick start configuration data. You should be able to use SQL Server Management Studio or Visual Studio to connect and inspect the data, but you probably see already the advantages. Now we can build MVC application or Razor Page application or APIs which will allow us to add all these records into the tables, so we don't have to manually change source code or something. We can allow developers to go there, register their clients, and do whatever we like. Run the client application. You should now be able to run any of the existing client applications and sign in, get tokens, and call the API, all based upon the database configuration. Okay, we are definitely able to do that. Let me close the Visual Studio for now. I can close this as well because I will have quite a lot of work here to do in the console. First, let me make sure that if I run the application separately, all they communicate between each other correctly and everything works fine. So I will say .NET run here. This is the IdentityServer project, which is running on 5001, port 5001. Okay, so this PowerShell has been occupied by this running application. So what I'm going to do now is change directory. How easily we can check if everything works? We can run our JavaScript application, for example, which requires access to API, so we definitely need the API to run, because this is the resource, the protected resource by the IdentityServer. We can say .NET run again, .NET run. It runs on 6001. and we'll run finally our JavaScript application. I will run all of them. By the way, we can of course run our console application, which is again using the API, but first it gets a token from the identity server. So let's say client, and let's run it. .NET run, and let's see if everything works. Now it should first obtain a token, and after that communicates with the API. This is the portion where it communicates with the API. It comes from the API, and this comes from the identity server, this part. So the console application, as you can see, works. Just for fun, I'm going to open for each one of the applications a separate PowerShell. Change directory, source. Now what else can we do? Actually run our JavaScript application. Change directory JavaScript, .NET run. Okay, our JavaScript application is running on 5003. Oops, I didn't copy correctly, but whatever. 5003. So let's go to the JavaScript, login. Here we go, Bob. And the password is Bob. Again, login. It's gonna redirect back to the JavaScript application, and if we want from the JavaScript application now, on behalf of Bob, we can access the API, which could be on the third-party domain. Okay, so, and we can log out, and we can go back, and it says user not logged in. Okay, so let's run the last application, which is our MVC application. Change directory. Oh my god, let me copy the path from somewhere, so I don't have to type it. Source, let's go to MVC and run our MVC client. .NET run, as far as I remember, it runs on 5002. It's gonna tell us anyway. Localhost 5002, and voila, 5002 directly redirects us to 5001, which is our identity server, our own. We can log in with external account, or we can log in as Bob. Oops. Login. We have been redirected back to the callback. Now, to communicate with the API, actually, we have home, not log out, but call API. Here we go. It works. Now, this MVC application communicates with the API, which is protected resource by IdentityServer. And the API returns all this, and of course we can log out. It's just a question of putting the right links here, and everything is gonna work. Okay, so the MVC works, the console works, our JavaScript client works, the API works, everything works. Now the challenge is actually to run this application using not only Castro, using Internet Information Services. Gonna close all this and change the startup in properties, which will allow us to run the very same thing with Visual Studio, not only one by one into the console in the PowerShell. Okay, so what do we have to do? Let's open it again in Visual Studio and look at now our Visual Studio code. Before we do that, actually, I'm gonna commit. Okay, so let me go to the Team Explorer, changes, and here what do we have to say here? Add migrations and create the database. We didn't actually need to run .NET Entity Framework update database. Everything happened immediately, but for the next migrations we have to do that. Okay, so we have this. Now let me look at where the API is running. We have properties, we have launch settings. Let's take a look. So we want this to run on how much? 6001. Let's try and see if we can change this port to 6001. Application URL HTTP localhost, but this is not the secure. We'll say 6001, and hopefully it's gonna work. I don't actually need this 6000 anyway. We'll keep it as it is right now, like that. Okay, so I don't have to change constantly the ports and the way we are running the application. Identity server, we have nothing to change here. Let me just show you the properties. They're absolutely simple. This properties have been created, launch properties has been created by the template, which tells me that if I have only this minimalistic launch settings JSON file, I still will be able to run it. JavaScript, okay, properties, launch settings. JavaScript runs on 5003. Let me try the same. Try to run it in 5003. I could have changed. No, I cannot change this because they have to have a different port. So let me run it this way. Let me save it this way, and the rest is MVC. This is the last one. The most important is the API. It doesn't matter where the clients are running, because actually it matters, because the redirect URLs are important and they point back to this application. So yeah, it matters. And let me go there. This is 5002. Let me change it to 5002 and run it now from Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Prime, and see if we can get it working. Okay, now I'm gonna hit start. IdentityServer and the API will be run, and we will see the ports where they are running. Oh, yeah, it's 6001, 5001, it's okay, but let me see the message here. This site can be reached. The connection was reset. Try check the proxy and the firewall, running Windows Network Diagnostics, error connection reset. Okay, if we don't succeed, I'll figure out where the problem is and I'll fix it. Reload, of course, weather forecast. The connection was reset. It doesn't give us 401 or something else. Okay, anyway, let me try and see if I can run the JavaScript application, for example. Going to debug and say start an instance. It should run on 5003. Okay, let me try to log in now. Yeah, I may be able to get it working. Bob, login. The site cannot be reached. Callback code, blah 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 blah. So there is some kind of a problem here. Reload, Internet Information Services is not allowing us. Localhost, the secure connection, localhost 5003. Okay, I have to look at again these configurations. Come up, anonymous authentication true, Windows authentication false, profile ASP.NET Core environment development, environment variables, launch browser. Maybe it has something to do with the security. So I'll figure this out, and when I find a solution, I will let you know, guys. So, but the most important thing, the bottom line is that the application runs from the console, as you can see, and everything works properly. By the way, this is important because we're going to use Linux containers to put these applications in different containers, and there we will be running Kestrel, not in Internet Information Services, and it works with Internet Information. Oh, it works with Kestrel. Okay, so we partially got it working here in Visual Studio directly. I'll figure out where the problem is. As I said, maybe with the security certificates, and has something to do with this. I'll figure out that. This concludes the video. Thank you very much.